In this video, I'm planning to share some of the most important mistakes that a lot of people are doing in astrophotography that are limiting their results in this amazing hobby. So in this video, I'm planning to share some of these mistakes with you so that you can improve your images in deep sky astrophotography. These are mistakes I made myself, and after removing them, I really made my images better, and therefore I want to share them with you. The first mistake might be very obvious, but still it's a very important one. And that is about your mount, and especially about the payload capacity. I've been doing this, or I've seen so many people doing this mistake, myself here and there sometimes, so it is a problem that I do have right now to a certain level, not as relevant as other people do have this problem, but the mistake is that a lot of people are really pushing their mounts to their limits, which is totally a mistake that you should avoid in astrophotography. That's very, very important. So I've often seen that people are really pushing their mounts to the limits of the payload capacity, but the problem is that that might lead to a tracking that's not that good. And as you know, Earth is rotating, and tracking is one of the most important points in astrophotography. If your tracking is not good enough, and if your mount is not tracking the night sky good enough, you'll get star trails in the end. And there, it is not important how good your telescope is. You can use a telescope that costs $7,000. If the stars are not round because of the tracking, you know, it's not a good idea using a very expensive telescope. Then you can achieve the exact same results with a cheaper telescope because the tracking is your problem, and that's a very important mistake. Therefore, I would really recommend to not use a very heavy telescope on your mount. For sure, that always depends on the conditions. That's a very important point as well. So in this case, I'm using the Skywatcher 150 PDS in combination with a guiding system, an actuator, my main camera. So in theory, that's definitely good enough. So in theory, the HQ5 Pro Go-To mount is capable of tracking this telescope, considering that the conditions are good, and that is the point. Last night I've used this telescope for astrophotography, but it was windy, and then the tracking wasn't that good, and therefore it's not only the weight of your telescope, but also the diameter or the size of your telescope. Because it's a very big one, you might really get problems with the wind, and therefore I'd really recommend to not push your mount to the payload capacity limits. That's very important. Point number 2 is about Newtonian telescopes as well, and it's about using a coma corrector. So a lot of people might not know that, but when using a Newtonian telescope, it's very essential using a coma corrector. It is a mistake that a lot of people are doing, unfortunately, but that really limits the results in astrophotography. I see that the beginners are buying a Newtonian telescope like this one, then they buy a very expensive camera, but then they do not have enough money for the coma corrector, and that's a very big mistake. And the problem is that when using a very expensive camera, you'll still get these, some kind of star trails in your image. That's the problem, because then the stars will be sharp and very round in the center, but in the other regions, you'll get star trails. And that's something we totally do not want in our images in astrophotography. And in this case, you cannot really push your camera to its limits when you're not using a coma corrector, because you'll get these certain star trails in your image, especially in these corners. You can crop your image, but it's definitely not a good idea. I mean, these coma correctors are not that expensive. I bought this coma corrector for around $200, but when comparing the coma corrector to the rest of your equipment, it's a very important upgrade that you have to make. That's very important, definitely. The next mistake I do see quite often is a mistake that I'm doing right now myself with this setup. So the mistake is not using a dew heater in combination with your guide scope. In summer it's not that relevant, but especially in winter it's a problem that might really totally destroy your image in the end. The problem is when dew is building up on your guide scope, your guiding camera is really having challenges detecting the stars, and therefore it's not guiding as good as before because it's not seeing the stars as they were before, and therefore that's really resulting in tracking mistakes. So your mount is not tracking that good anymore. Therefore the stars are not round, and I've had that problem once again. I've had that problem one time, and the guiding system totally lost the star, and therefore it really stopped guiding, and therefore I had star trails throughout my entire image. Therefore, really try to not make this mistake yourself in deep sky imaging. That's very important. Mistake number 3 is about the location of the object of the object you like to image, and therefore I really always recommend to look for objects that are very high in the night sky. And if you're using the CWO ASIR Pro, that's not a problem, because you can click on the button where you can look for the object, and then you can look for recommended objects, and then you can set the position of your object, and then you can select that the app is only showing you objects that are very high in the night sky. That is something I'm always using, and then I'm planning to check, and then I'm checking which object is the highest throughout the entire night, because that's very important, because the higher the object is, the better the seeing all the conditions are. Sometimes people are trying to capture summer objects in winter, and therefore they are planning to capture them when they are very low to the horizon, but the seeing is not good. It's definitely not a good idea, especially in summer when there are a few houses in the way, and then the roofs are quite warm or hot, and therefore you will get a lot of not good seeing in that direction, and therefore really try to not make that mistake in the future. It's very important. I would really recommend that for you, because that really helps you to achieve better results in deep sky astrophotography. And I made the mistake myself in the very beginning as well. So I looked for objects that I liked, and that was a mistake. But now I'm looking for objects that I do like to image and that are very high in night sky. And the combination of these two aspects really helped me improve my images in astrophotography. So it's definitely a very important tip, definitely. So, for example, when capturing an object, that when it comes to the position, they move like this in the night sky, And I've captured objects throughout the entire night, and when comparing the images captured when the object is the highest and the lowest, there is a big difference between these images when it comes to sharpness and details visible. That's definitely a very important mistake that a lot of people are unfortunately still doing in astrophotography. The next mistake is once again about using Newtonian telescopes. So as you can see, there are a lot of mistakes that you can do with these telescopes, but for sure I really enjoy using my Newtonian telescope, because the price is just perfect. The problem or the mistake is about collimation. So sometimes I talk to beginners and ask them about how they do the collimation process, and then they do say that they have never collimated their telescope. And when looking at the images, I do see these. I do see that they are not collimating the telescope, because the out regions are no longer sharp. They are having star trails in these edges, and that's about collimating the telescope. Because if your telescope is not collimated correctly, collimating your telescope means basically aligning the mirrors of the telescope the way they should be in order to achieve the sharpest possible images. That's the point. And if these mirrors are not aligned perfectly, you'll get problems in the end. So in certain corners, the stars might not be that round, or in the worst case, your entire image is not sharp. And that is a mistake a lot of people do. Therefore, if you're using a Newtonian telescope, definitely definitely do the collimation process that helps you to really achieve the best images in deep sky astrophotography. So these are basically the 4 mistakes I've planned to introduce to you. I made some of these videos a couple of years ago about mistakes, so if you have not yet checked them out, feel free to check them out. If you do know other mistakes, feel free to share them down below in the comments, because that might be helpful to other people here in this astrophotography community. If you would like to further support me, you can now become a member of my channel. Becoming a member of my channel would really support me, and your support definitely really means a lot to me. If this video was interesting and helpful to you, I would really appreciate a like and a subscription. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, clear skies, Felix.